This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 72 of the Wisdom by WESA show on the Horse Radio Network. This is Mike Donnell.
I'm Casey Wilbanks-Coletti.
And this is Sophia Aguilar. Welcome to Wisdom by WESA on the Horse Radio Network.
This podcast is brought to you by the Western and English Sales Association, WESA, which provides the world's largest trade events for retailers, manufacturers, and sales representatives of the equestrian industry. In this podcast, we feature exclusive interviews with noteworthy Western and English personalities, retailers, and exhibitors who you've always wanted to talk to. Don't miss out on all the news for manufacturers and retailers in the equine industry. Today's guest is a former MAC president. Sophia is here to tell us what that means to WESA.
Yes, so MAC stands for the Men's Apparel Club of Colorado, and it's very significant to WESA because under that corporate name, the association was established in 1921, and it's what the association was called up until 1989. After that, it was renamed to WESA, which of course we all know as the Western and English Sales Association.
Why was the association renamed?
Well, the times had changed, and WESA more accurately reflected the image of the trade show because by that time it had become one of the nation's premier equestrian and Western events, and actually also the largest show of its kind, including all members of the industry. So quite naturally, the name was then changed to WESA. And we have found out that the history of WESA itself is actually not known to many of our members. So in preparation for the 100th anniversary in January 2022, we have gathered all of the important historical facts about WESA on wesatradeshow.com/timelines so everyone can go and have a look.
Oh, how neat. Speaking again about today's guest, what kind of role did he play?
So today we'll interview Bob Davidson, who was the MAC president in 1974 and 1975. And long story short, he randomly met our trade show manager's family in a restaurant and shared some stories about the association. So it's truly a small world that we're all living in. But of course, we wanted to share these stories from almost 50 years ago with our listeners.
To say that Bob Davidson's professional history is interesting is somewhat of an understatement. Prior to a stellar career in the Western apparel business, he owned and managed one of the largest buffalo herds in the world. Then he switched to home construction business, where he managed the work of some 600 carpenters and tradesmen. Then a neighbor convinced him to switch careers and start selling clothing. He ultimately traveled 7 states. He joined the Men's Apparel Club and eventually became president. He continued in the business when the Men's Apparel Club became WESA, and today at age 87, he's still representing some lines. We're glad to welcome Bob to the show today. Horse owners always pay close attention to the condition of their horse's hoofs. Spotting a problem or an issue is not the same as knowing what to do about it. Each episode of Healthy Hoof features discussions about various philosophies on the health of the hoof and the soundness of your horse, including interviews with professionals in the field, including farriers, trimmers, vets, and body workers. Listen to new episodes and past episodes alike on the Horse Radio Network. Bob Davidson, welcome to the Wisdom by WESA podcast.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things that we do a lot on this show is we talk to people who've been involved in the industries. We chat about how they got involved in the industry. And, of course, yours is a bit different because, as I recall from what we chatted about yesterday, you really got into the business at the suggestion of your neighbor.
That's right, Herb Goldsby.
But I think prior to that, a lot of people kind of grow up in the business. You have a much different history. As you were telling me, and I want to start with that, you were responsible for, managed, and or owned one of the largest buffalo herds in the world.
Well, I managed it, and I was the buyer and ran the ranch. It wasn't my ranch. It was Texas Meat Packing out of San Francisco, but Missoula.
And how many buffalo did you manage?
Well, when I started, we bought about 350 head for the Little Buffalo Ranch, and then I got about 650 head out of the Yellowstone Park. I bought the largest private herd out of Rodan, Montana, the largest private owned herd out of Redlands, California, the largest private owned herd out of Kent, Texas, and brought aboard Gillette, put them in the ranch. When I left the ranch, I had about 1,600, and within the year after that, they had things I purchased and other ways. They had about 2,200 head.
That is a lot of buffalo.
Yeah, it was the most buffalo until Ted Turner got involved.
Well, and that had to have been a fascinating job, but for whatever reason, you left that and you got in the construction business. And instead of 2,500 head of buffalo, you had 500-600 carpenters and tradesmen that you were responsible for, right?
Yeah, we were the second largest home builders in the United States as Pearl Mac Homes in North Glen and South Glen, Denver. And we built from 15 to 1,700 homes a year at that time.
And whatever can help your neighbor convince you to give up that to get in the clothing sales business?
Well, management changed in the construction business. There were three owners and probably some of the nicest people I ever worked for. But I just got tired of all the rigmarole there, and the thing on the road as a commissioned salesman, you're in charge of yourself and your product.
So when you started, what lines were you carrying, and what was it like in those days traveling, I think you said 7 states, calling on retailers, adding lines, whatever that it was that kept you interested and involved in the business? Tell us about those days, if you will.
Well, I started out with 4 glove lines that Hearst Goldsby gave me because he had gone to work for a company, Ardmore, Oklahoma leather jacket company, and they wanted an exclusive with him. And then I just started gathering any lines I could get, as all salesmen do. I picked up necktie line, underwear line. A year later, I had some friends because I'd rodeoed for several years prior to this whole conversation. So I knew a lot of people in the Western business, having rodeoed for about 10 years off and on. And when I finally got a boot line, Higher Boot at the time was the oldest boot line in the industry. And I just went from there because in rodeoing, I had traveled a lot, so I knew how to check into a motel. I knew how to, take care of my car and whatever else. So then you build up an association, a brotherhood with your fellow salesmen on the road, and it just is. We helped one another out back in those days. We were very the salesmen, if they knew you, got to like you, and and I knew the territory already because I'd traveled at rodeo on it, so I pretty well knew how to get around.
So when did you join the Apparel Club?
I joined the Apparel Club about 1964. At the time, Hearst insisted that I join the club, and then we also had a national apparel sales organization. He insisted I joined that at the time, too, because all the prior presidents and older salesmen have all been members of that.
So then you eventually matriculated to the top and became the president. What was the market and the business like at the time you became president?
Well, about the time just before I went into selling, they held their markets at the Adams Hotel. Then they moved to the tower downtown there, and I was trying to think of the old trade thing. And then they built the market out there. And the first year or so I was there, I did a lot of rooms in the market in order to gain. I built their market rooms for them, like, Hirsch. And I built desks, and I did a lot of interior work because I'd had a lot of experience in cabinetry and that, having been to the home building. And so I did that as we went along to make extra money. And things were, well, the first year I was on the road traveling, my rooms, including my markets, cost an average of $6 a night. God, I don't even know how these guys today are staying on the road with the cost of a car. Rooms are $150 a night. Meals are outrageous anymore, gasoline. But it was a good life, and it was a very good group of people you're with.
I would bet when you were paying $6 a room at night, you weren't selling products at the same prices that they are today, though.
Well, heavens no. A pair of all kangaroo boots was retailed for about $34.95. Had boots that cost $16, all horsehide boots. That today that would be $300 cost. Yeah.
It really would be. Now, Casey, of course, who's my co-host here, also comes out of the rodeo world and has traveled around a lot, and she appreciates that part of the life. But she's also one of our fashion and clothing experts. Casey, hop in here and chat a bit.
Bob, I'd love for you to tell us a little more about your rodeo days. It's always interesting to just have a little more backstory about, what made you you.
Well, I do all the old timers. In fact, Patty Ryan was the first guy that helped me get on a saddle bronc, who was a world champion, and I knew all. If in Wyoming at that time, you knew everybody in the horse business. Kings out of Cheyenne, King Merritt and Sonny and Cotton and all that. You knew all the guys that was making horse trailers, Roy Barnes in Denver. It was a brotherhood. I mean, you knew everybody. Yeah. And if you needed a rope horse, they'd say, well, just go get the one off the fence over there and that. But Casey Tibbs, I knew Casey when he first broke into the world. Gerald Roberts was a wonderful friend of mine. I traveled some with Jack Bushbaum when he was world champion, and he won it 3 times in the bareback ride. He was in the top 3 for 17 years in the bareback ride. But you knew everybody, and during like National Western in Denver, you all hung out together. I mean, they pretty well hung together. There was a lot of them, because when I got my card the first time, I was below 1,000. My membership, in fact, Roddy Bloxham's here staying with me right now, and he and I had a ranch together in Ellisburg, Washington. We rodeoed together. We had a place over in Casey, Wyoming, ran sheep and cattle for a while, and his number, we were talking about it last night, is 768Y.
Oh, my goodness.
And you don't even know what the Y was for on there. If you had a Y on your number, that meant you could give him a check.
Really?
Yeah. And then they changed the numbers, and they lost a lot of their bookkeeping of the RCA, because they held all their meetings. The association did at the Brown Palace in Denver. I was instrumental in helping them get barrel racing into the National Western at that time. We were talking about that last night. We only had 5 events. Now it's like a carnival. They got breakaway roping, shooting the horseback balloons and everything. Yeah. But those guys back then also, you didn't hardly have anybody that didn't work 2 or 3 events.
Sure.
And your saddle bronc riders were bulldogging, and bull riders were riding Bulldogs were riding bulls, and yeah. If you look back
That's
in the
right.
history, and I'm glad to see the young Wright boy win the all around because it's
Yes.
tired of all the damn roper. Pardon my expression.
Yeah, it's you're right. I think I was born too late because it just I'm certain that it may have been harder to get things done back then, but you've mentioned the word brotherhood so many times, and it was different. It was different back then, and it was cool, very cool. But nonetheless, in addition to that, I think what it shows, you've kind of done it all. Really, you've done it all, but there's one thing in common in all the things you've done, and your ability to be a good leader. And that's what's led you to all the things that you've done. What makes a good leader? What made you a good leader? What makes you a good leader?
Well, you make yourself useful to begin with. You see something needs done or somebody needs some help, you jump in and do it. And I don't know, it's just a lot of it's how you're raised and the people you're around. And when I was young, all the people I worked for mostly been in World War One. And then, of course, I grew up during World War II, and people worked back in those days. You always had a job, and everything was worth something. You didn't throw a gunny sack away as worth a dime. A beer bottle was worth 1.5 cents to 5-10 cents, and stuff like that. But I guess, well, in the Army when I was in Korea, I made rank faster today. You talk to a lot of these guys, it takes 4 years to get corporal in the Marine Corps. I was a sergeant before I could look left and right. So
Yeah,
I guess it is leadership. So
sure. You bring a lot to the table, authenticity and motivation, and you're one of those cowboys of yesteryear that are just so valuable to our future and the present. And this is maybe kind of an obvious question, but I'd like to know from your perspective, just the change in fashion since you started with the men's apparel club to now. I mean, obviously there's obvious differences, but just from your perspective.
well, I think the quality of the goods was better quality. I'm talking about like clothing day. You go look at a lot of clothing, and it looks like cheesecloth, and of course the prices are outrageous on everything today. But the craftsmanship, where there's a lot more hand craftsmanship, and the craftsman was, Denver, Colorado. One time, all the Western shirts were made in Denver. There wasn't hardly a company outside of Denver making shirts, and the boot business. There again, the boot business was small. In fact, right after the war, they didn't even stock boots in stores. Everything was made to measure, and Hires was the first one that ever did that. And it's I don't know. It's just a whole different, so much faster, and everything's built today as a mass, where it was individually built. A lot of stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Would it be fair to say that when we're talking about the time period of $6 hotel rooms and $30 boots, was it a necessity for products to be made better back then for longer longevity due to the inability to afford items very often, to replace items very often?
Yeah, see, that's another thing. I bought out Hire Boot Company. Sidney Myers and I, we started Honcho Boot, which is still in effect. Sidney died. I sold out Sidney, but his wife's running it, and I'm still helping her by selling boots in Montana and Wyoming to my people I've known and their kids and everything for years. But we still make them the old way, and we probably Honcho probably makes more custom-like boots than anybody else in the business, and most people haven't even heard of us.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't do any national advertising. It's all word of mouth, and we do about 50% of our business. is we make it with the store label in it.
Awesome.
So, and then also while we're visiting, I was also helped found the Can-Am market up in Calgary in Canada, and I was the president of that from 1984 to 85, the chairman in 86, and I was on the board there for 29 years, besides being in Denver for 20 years on that board and that. So, yeah, I got to really know the people in the manufacturing, and I've seen all the changes, and I got to see look, today on the road, there's very few commission salesmen around. They can't make a living at so high price. Most of them are working for the companies. So that's changed.
Well, I think it's obvious in visiting with you, even though Mike or I may not have been around in the men's apparel club days, but it's obvious you were an asset then, and we're part of the reason why it's still succeeding today.
Well, I hope so. I hope it goes on and on. I've got friends that are on the road still today that come by and see me and stay with me once in a while, and I try to feed them and give them the cheap whiskey. But
there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, no. But they reciprocate. Yeah. But if you look back, and I was going over the list of past presidents, and they just go out of their way to help you and to get you established and kind of correct your manners if you weren't doing the right thing, and kind of like being a grandpa or a dad or an uncle or something like that. But I have been going to markets. Of course, the markets have been that active, but also when I was president, that's when WESA broke away from our marketing, and that was like a small war. They found out the manufacturers, they spent $10 for every dollar we spent as salesmen putting on the markets. And Chuck Bailey was the president of the retailers at the time, and he and I got together, put the market back together, and kind of wrote the rules of how we're going to do it, and reestablished that the salesmen, the changes I've seen even in the association, like allowing manufacturers to be members. They could be members when I was there, but they didn't have any voting right. And so that's all changed. And so you look at the politics of what's going on today, and it definitely has changed.
Well, and I think the world changes as we move along. I kind of wanted to touch on one more thing, Bob, because I'm sitting here looking at and thinking back. I mean, you switched dramatically in industries. I mean, from managing a buffalo herd to managing carpenters to selling over the road, and yet you successfully worked into both of those. Tell me what went through your mind and how you adopted, because I did not see, maybe you see, similarities between managing a buffalo herd, managing carpenters, and trying to sell clothing. How did you manage to make that switch so smoothly and successfully?
Well, first of all, I had the one that still have her, a wonderful wife, and she never fought me on anything I wanted to do. If I wanted to ride bulls, okay. If I wanted to build fence, that's okay, whatever. But she was always supportive, and I always said she'd rather live in a tar paper shack than she would in a palace, as long as she had land. It wasn't a lot of land. But no, you work with people. People's what makes everything work, and anything that isn't managed properly doesn't succeed. I don't care what you're doing. You got to have good management, and you got to have good people, and you got to work with those people. And if they don't know, show them how to do it, or find a way for them to learn to do it. So I've always enjoyed everything I ever did. I've never, if I was car hopping or washing dishes in a restaurant in Texas, or which I've done a few times, I enjoyed it. I knew I was going to have a better job down the road. So you always got to look down the road and look for something to do. And like I say, I tell all my grandkids, if you don't do anything, be helpful. If somebody needs some help, take your time and help them. And I think that's still a good rule.
Yes.
I think it is. And if I can think of a couple of words to describe you, one has to be you're an optimist. You look at the positive side of things and find a way to make what you're doing positive for you and for other people.
Well, I hope so. And I tell all the younger kids that I know, or these people that can't smile in the morning, I said, attitude is 90% of life. If you think you're happy, you're happy. If you're hurt, you're hurting. I said, you got to get your attitude going before you get anything else going. And that's kind of the way I live.
Well, I'm glad you do, and I'm glad you took the time to share your stories and your history with us on the Wisdom by WESA show. We thank you, and I know the listeners are going to thank you after they hear the show.
Well, thank you, folks, and thank you for taking your time, and thank you for letting me be with you.
Well, thank you for your time. The show notes and links from today's show can be found at the website wisdombywesa.com. And, of course, we'd love your feedback. There's a contact link on that website.
The Wisdom by WESA show will be published on the 15th and 30th of every month. You can listen on most of your favorite podcast players, and you can also listen on the Horse Radio Network app on your iOS or Android phone. You just search Horse Radio Network in the App Store. It's free and it's super easy to use. Be sure to visit all the great shows on the Horse Radio Network at horseradionetwork.com. And thanks for listening to the Wisdom by WESA podcast. WESA, where the industry meets.